What we've seen from the pandemic and what technology allows is the fragmentation, if you like, of a workforce. Because I always thought, you work for something like Uber, and as a worker, you're never more connected, but you're never more alone. And in trade union organizing situation, this is a point of vulnerability and real weakness for you. If you're part of a huge workforce, but you can't come together, you can't unite, you can't bargain together. And I think this is what the effect that these technologies will have on more traditional workplaces that have always been unionized in the future. It will serve to fragment that workforce. More people will work remotely. More people will work across teams, work in flat organizations, and have less opportunity to organize and cohese and to socialize together at work and to deal with workplace problems. And the technology can be a disruptor, a fragmenter of that type of workplace dynamics that's really important. I was an archetypal gig worker. I wanted to do something on the side while I started a social enterprise, working for Uber on the weekends. And one evening I was assaulted on the job, and I thought, well, this is going to be great. I've got a full digital footprint here. It'll be no problem. The police will be able to track down the assailant very easily. So we started that challenge in 2015. And it reached a Supreme Court ruling earlier this year that Uber drivers are workers. Well, there's a moment in the Employment Tribunal hearings when Uber came to court with all of my data, full record on every job I'd ever accepted, what my completion rate was, what my decline rate was, my acceptance rate, how much I had earned. Very, very rich data set, but I had nothing. We've had to overcome an awful lot of resistance in getting access to this data and helping drivers get access and workers get access to their data from these platforms. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. If you don't know what data they're processing and how they're processing it, it's very difficult then to be able to make a detailed subject access request and know when you've had a complete fulfillment of that request. We're still not there, but that's been a very difficult process. But the vision is to build a data trust so that workers can come together, share their data, and then also share their experience and organize for better terms and conditions. Well, trade unions exist to serve the workers, to regulate the relationships between the employer and employees. That's the legal definition of what a trade union is. So if trade unions are not ready to meet this challenge, I would say that it's because workers are not yet ready to meet this challenge. It is the workforce in general that is trying to cope and understand with these new technologies that are being increasingly intrusive technologies that are being used in all sorts of workplaces. The gig economy is interesting because it's kind of an almost extreme example, but the same thing is happening everywhere. And so I would say, yes, trade unions need to work to keep up with this, but so do we all, because these technologies have creeped into our working practices and our workplace and how we work without much of a discussion at all. I think most gig economy workers are acutely aware to the extent that they are being surveilled. It's quite obvious when you work through digitally mediated workplace like Uber, Deliveroo and so on. I think workers are keenly aware that they're being very closely surveilled. What they may be less aware of is how the implications of that surveillance in the short and long term, and how they might be profiled, and how that surveillance, the data collected from that surveillance may be used in key decisions that affect them, like how much work am I going to get? What's the quality and the quantity of work I'm going to get? What is a good worker? What is a preferred worker and what is not? How do I perform well? How do I do well in this type of an environment? These things are always left very vague, partly because these companies really want to avoid any kind of employment relationship. So they don't want to get into this discussion about what it takes to be successful as a gig worker. Prefer to keep that vague and prefer to keep it almost Lord of the Flies thing, the strongest will survive, those who figure it out will do well. But this is the culture, is that you don't understand how to make money and you don't understand how to work on our platform. That is a very different type of relationship. And that's where gig economy workers struggle. They understand they're being surveilled, don't always understand the implications of what that might mean for them in the future. I think there are three areas of data that are really important. If you think about what kind of personal data is being processed by platform employers. Number one, and if we say that there's a sort of a battle for access of that data, on the green step is the data that we've put into the black box ourselves as workers. My name, my address, my vehicle registration, insurance details. There's not much dispute about this. I know you've got the data. I gave it to you, for goodness sake. I typed it in myself. That's the green step. Everybody agrees that exists and we should be able to get it back. On the amber step, where it's getting a little bit more contentious, is data observed about me at work. Is the machine observing me at work? So what would that mean for an Uber driver, delivery rider, courier? It is GPS tracking all the time you're working. It is ratings that customer gives you. It is telematics like braking, acceleration, speed. It could be things like your interaction with management. That is tracked and used in decisions for the future as well. Phone calls, audio, and so on. This is the type of data that is being observed about you at work. This is this amber. Then in the red box, this is where the most conflict is what we call inference data. So now that I've given you my data, now that you've observed me at work, what inferences do you draw about me? How have you profiled me? What decisions have you made about me using that data? Now that exists and it drives a lot of decision making about your position at work and the type of experience you will receive at work, whether you'll receive good work, whether you'll receive good pay, whether you have a future with these companies are determined by these types of inferences that are made. And that is the type of data that we're entitled to get to, but is very difficult to get access to. Well, I think what you have to do is forget everything you ever thought you knew about how the workplace works. The idea that we might have, the first step is to throw away the contract and misclassify the worker. But the next step is to kind of demolish some of the structures that we recognize as a workplace. Appeals process, human resources, employment law protections, and so on. And we replace them with a more flexible arrangement. That's what the gig economy promises, flexibility, but at a price. You lose some of your rights. But when we start doing that, then we try to imagine what this new workplace would look like. You can start to forget some of the things that you would have already recognized, like having a proper relationship with a human manager, having a human resource function that you can sort your employment relations problem. All of that disappears, and instead you're working for an algorithm. Where there was a member that we had worked with at the union who had a real problem. Something seemed to have gone wrong with the app, and he was not getting work all day. And he was sitting there getting more and more frustrated. And he would send a message, but the bots were answering back. So he could tell that this was a semi-automated response that he was getting. It did answer sort of the question that he was asking, but then not really. So he could tell it was a semi-automated response. And in order to get beyond that, to talk to a human being, he said, "I'm suicidal. I'm going to go home and kill myself if you don't give me some work." And then all of a sudden he got a response. I mean, they suspended him for a few days while they evaluated him. But he said, "I just did that because I had to get beyond the bots to talk to a human person to deal with my problem." And so that's the kind of Kafkaesque, strange world we start to enter, where it's a kind of an approximation thing. You're working for an algorithm. It's a mathematical relationship. And it doesn't really matter much what happens to you. We have some room for some Kafkaesque tragedies to happen along the way. As long as, the curve is smooth and upward towards profitability for everybody else, it's okay. That's the kind of strange world we enter with algorithmic management. It's not just the gig economy. If you look at the rise of this field of contingent labor, I think it's called, there's another new sexy name for it as well, which the name eludes me at the moment. This whole idea of contingent labor, what is it? It is gig economy for white collar workers. It's exactly that. And what corporations are looking for is greater flexibility to hire and fire certain groups of employees based on skills, so they can speed up their, delivery on their strategy. They can bring in new skills and new technologies and so on, and just discard a workforce that they feel isn't skilled to do what they want them to do. So there is a great demand amongst corporations to be able to, undercut the employment relationship and to have greater flexibility to just chop out lots of workers. So there is more pressure for people to work more flexibly and to surrender more of their rights. And a big part of enabling that is technology, surveillance technology, networks that you would operate within that would give you work or might take work away from you, just as it does for the gig economy. And so it's the same rules, it's the same game. The trouble is, if these employers and platform employers are successful in the gig economy, you know what? The canary will already be dead in the coal mine, and it may be too late to stop it for the rest of the economy if we don't tackle it now here.